Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
We have an author who is very, very interesting. And she's not an author who has written 10 books or she hasn't gone into journalism. She's just a nice lady that had a big story. And, of course, once she wrote this book, now she's also flirting with other books. But the book we wanted to talk about was Goodbye Russia, Hello America. Her name is Janet S. Kleinman. So welcome to our show, Janet.
Good. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so nice. I'd love to talk to authors. I think if I could make Boomer Times into only authors, I would do it.
You need the ads.
Yeah, we need the ads. But, authors are just so interesting, aren't they? I mean, I'm sure you know a lot by now. And because it takes a lot to write a book. You know that. Tell me what it took to write. If we're going to talk about Goodbye Russia, Hello America, and then we're going to flirt with disaster in your next book. But talk to me about what...
Well, the latest book was Goodbye Russia, Hello America. And what made me write that book was the fact that I was growing older. I thought I had an interesting background, not unique, lots of people. And I got turned on when I saw this business with the immigration situation politically. And I was appalled. Not that we should let everybody into the country, but the ones that had come before really made this country. And that goes back even into the 1900s and the 1800s. Everybody is an immigrant in America. And I wanted to honor that because I felt that the immigrants had given this country wonderful things. Yes, we had our share of renegades and gangsters and all that, but we also had our share of the Einsteins and the physicists and the Nobel Prize winners, and then just good plain people.
Well, it's the people who first came here, that actually the Pilgrims.
That's true.
It goes way back, but all of a sudden, some people always have to pick on somebody, and so it's the immigrants. But you had a story. That's what was so great. So you had a passion, and you said, okay, what can I do about this?
Okay, and I decided to start writing my second book, and I decided to write the story. And I thought the story had a lot to tell. And it told about the striving and the longing and the need to leave a place where they were poor and ignorant, frankly, no education, none of that. But they knew that that was what you needed to succeed. And so they left someplace they had lived all their lives, left some family behind, and came to America. Now, nobody could come to America unless you were very rich in the 1920s, unless somebody came first and somebody came after you. Very few families could pack up 4 and 5 and come at once. So there were 2 brothers who had already come, and they decided to bring the 2 other brothers and the mother. And they did. And the funny thing was that they probably got the cheapest tickets on the steamship. And these people, they didn't realize that their younger brothers didn't know the difference between Boston and New York. And so they came into the port of Boston. And in the port of Boston, there was no one there to pick them up. And they couldn't imagine why. And they didn't know it was Boston. And they didn't have a telephone or an iPhone or anything like that. But lo and behold, they were picked up and that night driven to New York. And they were driven to an area in the Bronx called Brook Avenue, which I didn't know about until years later. That was the place. After the Jews came, the Italians came, the Puerto Ricans came, they all came to Brook Avenue. That was the part of the East Bronx where immigrants came because it was cheap. And they started to make a home. And the home was in a...
Excuse me, I want to ask you a question, but they didn't even speak English.
No, but in America at that time, you didn't have to speak English to get along because you could go on the subway and ask somebody, and if he didn't know how to speak Yiddish, he'd say you did, or if he didn't know how to speak Italian, he's Italiener, and he speaks Italian. So that part of the city I knew because it still existed in the 40s and the early 50s, but then they all mixed languages. But at the earlier time, that was it. The barber on the corner where we lived sang opera, and he had a sign that said, Yiddish spoken here.
I love it.
So that was the where they eventually moved. But what happened is my grandmother was a feisty old lady. I thought she was old, but she wasn't really. She died when she was, her tombstone says 68. I mean, she had a little bun in her hair and gray hair and so on, but very bright. She had made sure in Europe, well, she had no money. She was a widow of 2 husbands, that they were apprenticed. So the 2 brothers who came first at 17 and 19, because they weren't going to the Tsar's army, they came as steel workers. And what does a steel worker do? He doesn't know anything about steel, and he came here, and they got jobs on gas stations fixing cars. Later on, they bought those stations, by the way, and they own them. So these are the 2 brothers who brought them, and the 2 younger ones had been apprenticed to bootmakers. The city of Brest-Litovsk was famous, which I found out during the research, for boots. And so they came here, and there were Landsleit, which are people from the same city, knew they were coming. They had jobs for them already because they were skilled. And it's something I hear, and I listen to the radio today about immigrants coming in, and I say they need skills. In order to succeed in this country, you have to be able to do something. And when you come in and you can't do something, you sweep a floor. So that is something that this turned me on, and I wrote the book. But I also remember the very end of the Second World War.
See, that's what made your book a little bit different than just the immigration.
Yeah. They were settling. One married an American woman, and he was Lieutenant Jack, the one who goes to service. And they gave back. They realized they didn't try to evade going to the Army or the Navy or the Marines. Of course, they worried about coming home alive. Everybody did. They had to give back because they felt they had been given so much. Their children were in school. They were prospering. They were working very hard. The Depression came, and they all had to cut back and all work together. Mama Rita sold homemade cookies on the street because that's what she needed to help finance this family. There were now 2 children, and Jack they all go for the physicals, and Jack, they try to bribe the people at the selection board because that's how things were done in those years. My father will tell you, my mother went to school, as that little aside from the book. My mother went to school the same time I did to learn English. I was in this classroom, she was over there, and she won a dictionary. And that dictionary we used until I went to college. She won Thorndike's dictionary. It was a red book. It was this big. But my father, and she got her citizenship papers and all the things and the tests, and she took my aunt, who was 80 at the time, and the judge looked at her and said, you're okay. You don't have to take the test. But my father, I said, how did you get your citizenship, Papa? And he said, we went to the draft board, and I knew Mr. Cohen, and I gave him a few dollars, and I didn't have to go through all of that. So today's people have to, and they have to know that without those citizenship papers, they can't become decent people. They may have working papers, the green card. It's not enough. They have to become Americans.
Well,
so we did.
Let me just tell you a little offside of that. My son is an immigration lawyer in Miami.
Oh, well, then you know.
Well, and the irony of this is that it's been harder way before even all this turmoil in the Middle East. But even people who had big businesses, and most of his clients are Italian, it's still tough. Even just to get a green card, they have to go through a lot of hoops, and they have to pay a lawyer a lot of money to do it. So immigration, people don't realize it until you're one of those people looking to come here. And it isn't to become an American citizen. It is just to get a visa to be able to work here. And so you speak really very well about this. When someone comes in, being a citizen there's nothing better. And so that's what happened. So you've been very embroiled in all that, it sounds like.
Yeah, but I got embroiled in the other part. When he leaves for Europe, he, by the way, is given whenever you go to the Army or the Navy, they give you an aptitude test. And lo and behold, this immigrant, who is now a super salesman, he's got a good gift of gab, is taken and made into an interpreter. He knew Russian, he knew German, and he knew English. And all of a sudden, they sent him to Dartmouth College to the language lab, which exists. And he is sent abroad to Germany. The war is ending, and they need somebody to interpret. And he is in Germany, but he also has a mission. And the mission is, he promised his mother. One son did not come with them. He stayed behind. And he promises her he will find him.
And, that's interesting to say, but here, go find him in Europe, right, with everybody else. How could he ever even figure that out?
Well, what happens is he arrives at the moment. He's parachuted in, and he meets a young boy who has escaped. Well, not escaped. They've just opened the concentration camps because the war is ending, and they're letting these people go anywhere they want. Well, they can't go home because that's been taken over by someone. And he meets a boy who joins him and thinks he knew his brother's child or grandchild at the cheder, at the school. And so he joins him. He knows his ins and outs, and he gets a 3-day pass from the colonel, who happens to wind up being Colonel Soberman, to go look for his brother in the concentration camps. And Colonel Soberman says to him, by the way, if you find anybody with Soberman, get him out too.
Oh.
So anyway, he goes on his journey, and he does manage, not the brother, but I'm not going to tell them.
No, don't. And of course, his mother does pass away.
Yes, his mother passed away.
So she never really got to, but somehow she knew he would, didn't she?
Well, she had she had tremendous control over her sons. And they appreciated the fact that whatever she had done for them in a war-torn, in a country that was plagued with overthrowing the Tsar and everything else, and didn't want them to go to the army. They used to take the boys and keep them in the army for 10 years, or maybe send them to Siberia. So they would run away if they could. So she helped them do that. But she demanded a pound of flesh when she came here. She was a tough bird, and they looked up to her, and they did take care of her. And that was her biggest wish.
And we won't tell you the end because you need to buy the book. And the book is called Goodbye Russia, Hello America, and it's Janet Kleinman, Kleinman, and you can actually go on Amazon and you can buy the book. You'll find a lot of familiar parts in there, as you said. Some things happen to everybody, just maybe the name's different or the language is different, but the scenario is very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, the first part of the book. The second part of the book, the soldiers came from all over.
Yeah.
But this little unique twist is a little different.
Yeah, no, it really was so well done, and I loved the cover with the Statue of Liberty and the man with the suitcase on his shoulder. I don't know, who was how did you get the book done? I mean, the cover.
The cover, well, it wasn't that difficult. The publisher, they keep stock photos. And first they ask you, what do you think would be like on the cover? And I gave them certain things. I want the Statue of Liberty. I want a boat coming in with immigrants, and et cetera, et cetera. And
they did it.
They sent me. That was a week's work that I had. They sent me stock photographs, and I had to choose what I liked, and I decided on this one because that's really what I think. I saw the masses, but an individual did. He had his one little suitcase or his one little duffel bag, and he came off the boat. The only difference I asked them to do, and it was probably true then, he's smoking a cigarette. He's not there. I said, can you take the cigarette out? It's not right for this
Oh, and he had a cigarette, and they took it out.
They took it out. They got it out. And that was my own. I said, I love it, and everybody has loved that cover.
Mm-hmm.
It's been,
Yeah, tells a big story in that one picture. That was really excellent. Well, let's go. Now you live in Delray Beach?
Yeah.
And
that was the first
book.
The
first book. I want to talk about that first book. So where did you get the nerve to write this first book?
Okay. I joined a writers group when I came here. I had always written, but I had written commercial. I wrote PR, and I wrote collateral materials for very large companies. My most famous one was The Waiting Room for Scott Klein and French, where they introduced Tagamet for ulcers. And Clifton Roberts was in that film, and I wrote all the collateral materials that went around.
Oh, see,
it.
so you're not just some little cookie maker.
No.
You had a lot of talent in this way, so it was just time for you to do this.
Anyway, I started writing about an old boyfriend. I says, oh, well, I'll do about an old boyfriend that calls me up, and et cetera. And that's how the book begins. And at the same time, I was teaching for the Literacy Council. And most of my students were Haitian, and they were good students, poor students, young and older. This particular one was older because he had to get out of Haiti. He was exiled. But he was a lawyer, so he was not just street smart. And also, where we live, all the help is Haitians. If you go into Delray Beach Hospital, all the help is Haitian. So I began to be very comfortable with them. And when I had my husband sick, I could communicate with him anyway and get what I needed very well. So I liked him. And I was lonely. I was a widow. In the book, I'm a widow. And so we went out for dinner one night with the lawyer, and a friendship grew. And the friendship grew all of a sudden. He's collecting drugs and other things from pharmacies and so on, goes down on relief missions to Haiti. And that's okay. He comes back, and he says, we could use you down in Haiti. The children are running wild. We need somebody to help with a school. Are you interested? Of course, she says no. However, a few weeks later, the Haitian earthquake occurs, and everything changes, and she decides to go. And she goes down there, and it's a love affair. They have a love affair. And she opens a school on the banks of the Caribbean for children who are deserted. The parents are killed. They have nowhere to go. And the school is run by her and a French nurse who's from the equivalent of Doctors Without Borders. I don't know what it's called. And it's a wonderful school. The children revive. They don't finish because the country is destroyed. Anyway, all of a sudden, her first boyfriend arrives. As he knew she was there, but he arrives to buy a hotel that's falling apart. A hotel, it's called an hotel in Haiti, and it used to be the biggest hotel there, and he wants to turn it back into the gambling casino it was. He tells her he's doing it to help the people, and they'll have cottages for the employees, etc. But he's really doing it because he wants to make a lot of money. He's a gambler.
But he also wants to be with her, I have to assume.
Yes, he wants to be with her. But meanwhile, she's been with the Haitian lawyer. But the Haitian's lawyer don't want her. The Haitian lawyer's parents don't want her. They want a Haitian girl for him. And they treat her terribly when he takes her to meet them. And if she finds out that when he was in Haiti, he had an affair with a younger woman. And his father says to her, he needs a younger one. You're too old. He has to have Haitian children, etc. Anyway, and that is part of it. But he rises politically to the point where he is nominated to be the new president of Haiti. His cousin was supposed to be because the country is really ruled by families. And she gets sick. So he takes on the running for the presidency of Haiti, and he's giving a lecture in the park, and she's there. And the father of the young woman that he got pregnant shoots him. And he goes to a hospital, and at that point, she has met the third man in her life, who is the U.S. consul in Haiti. And he takes charge of her, and he takes her to the hospital to see him, and so on and so forth.
Does he live? Maybe you shouldn't tell us.
No, I'm not going to.
Don't tell us. You know what? We're going to have to do something with this book. I actually am going to read it now. I didn't have a chance to read it. It's been sitting on my table. That's why when I knew you were coming in, I wanted you to bring it because it's so well done. But I mean, just from what I've looked, it seems so romantic.
It is. I mean, there's gasping when people read that book. It's totally different than this.
What does your husband think when he sees a book like this?
He's proud.
I was going to say, how do you think about these things? Are you
Well, I always had an imagination. I think back as a child, I remember being the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, and my mother making me a yellow costume with purple hearts. You know how many years? I don't have to tell you how many years ago that was. But these were the things I loved. I loved school, but I was smart and I was an achiever, but I loved the other things school gave you, which was clubs and activities and acting and everything like that, too.
Let me tell everybody again. So I want to make sure you buy this book. Good. Now, you've heard, of course, Janet before, but we're talking a little bit differently this time. Goodbye, Russia. Hello, America. Janet Kleinman, Kleinman. That's Janet S. Kleinman. And you'll get that on Amazon.com. And then there's another book called Flirting with Disaster, When Love and Nature Collide. And it's a very beautiful cover. It looks like an island. Now we know it's Haiti, or supposedly. And this is also, let's see where they can buy that one. Also on Amazon? Okay. So now I guess my next question to you is, are you writing another one?
I've had some tough times with a husband who is ill, but I have a story in the back of my mind, and he was in a facility, and he has met a wonderful Japanese lady who's as smart as him in that facility. It's a mental facility. She looks like the original China doll, but she's Japanese. And that he has a little friendship with her, and I'm relieved because he's happier than he was. But she, coincidentally, was married to an American flyer who was in Japan, and my husband was also stationed in Japan as an 18 or 19-year-old. So that's going around in my head, but I don't know. I just saw Madame Butterfly, and I'm not sure it'll turn into a Madame Butterfly. As soon as lifetime calms down a little, I'm going to start writing this book.
Now, when you're doing something like this, do you outline first?
No.
What do you do?
People do. I take a yellow pad, and I just write on it. It's not typed up yet. It's nothing. What do I want to do? And then I go right to the computer and do one chapter at a time and let that chapter lead me into the next. I know how the book's going to end usually, and I know how it's going to begin. And then the rest changes as I work.
Oh, this is such a marvelous thing because, Janet, there are so many older adults who want to write books and they don't know how to get started. A lot of them have very interesting careers. I'm sure you've made a lot of friends with people like this.
Well, I belong to a writers group at the Delray Public Library. Up until now, I haven't had time to go. They're having some organizational problems. So whatever. And I found them, and I went. And I read, and they read. And a lot of them are very bright. But you have things to learn. I don't know if I told you this or not, but one of the members was a writer for the Herald Tribune. And the first thing I wrote, I don't remember what it was, and we only could write fiction. It was limited to fiction. So he raised his hand and he said, Janet, you write beautifully, but you are not writing fiction. You are writing commercial stuff. And it's different. I don't know what he really meant, but I listened a while and I read books and I played around, and then I began to write short stories. And one of them, called My First Love, was the basis of the first part of that book. That won a prize from Writer's Digest.
Wow.
So, and then I suddenly realized that what was different, emotionally and everything else. And it wasn't a memoir, it was a make-believe, but based on things I knew about.
Well, I think most writers do that, actually.
I'm sure they do. They might, and I talk about the grandma. My grandmother was a tough bird, but she's not either in the book. She's just used some of her traits and some of her personality, which I would use, and you would do if you were writing a book. If you had,
right?
Don't bother.
Turn it off. And so, okay, well, Janet has been she's really quite an interesting guest, and we're very excited to have someone like this because hopefully she will be inspiring you, and that's really the most important thing, that you have someone who inspires. That's what authors do. We have a lot of authors that come on our our radio show. And I've had physicians, I've had scientists, I had Jane Fonda, I've had Engelbert Humperdinck, I've had a lot of people, and yet I've had people who've just written books, and they are so good. And so, I mean, you don't have to be a Tennessee, you don't have to do that. You just have to have a passion for who you are, what you want to say. But then, of course, you do have to know English. You do have to put your paragraphs in a state where you lead people on so that they want to keep going to the next. And I wanted to talk to you about the short stories. Yours are not short stories. They're really, they're a book. I do have some short stories. In fact, you'll notice in this issue coming up, you'll notice that there's a woman who lives in Hawaii, and she wrote a book. The book is actually about Hawaiians, and they talk about their life. It's very, very interesting. It's called Kauai Stories, Kauai, and it's from the island. And some are longer stories, some are short, and they talked about what the hula is and what this meant. I love short stories because you can get it over, done, get right.
They're not easy to write because you have to write a beginning, a middle, and an ending in a very limited space. You can't afford to be ultra verbal. You have to be verbal and catch someone's attention. So it was not easy. I was stunned when I won a prize.
And what was your short story about?
It was about a first boyfriend who gets in touch with me 40 years later.
So how many pages was it? I mean, is it long?
No, it was usually the short story contests have a limited number of words. I would say it was no more than 1,200 words.
Wow. That is so lovely. And, I'm so excited that you were able to come here today and be here with us. And remember now, you'll want to look at this book called Flirting with Disasters When Love and Nature Collide by Janet S. Kleinman. And, of course, the Goodbye Russia, Hello America, which is very powerful. And you'll really enjoy both books. So thank you so much for coming, Janet.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.